Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tavern Hunter podcast. Today on the show, I'm joined by Takuma Okada. Takuma Okada is a musician and game designer, perhaps best known for their work on Alone Among the Stars. Takuma, thanks so much for joining me.
And thank you for having me, Derek.
Of
I'm
course.
happy to be here.
All right. so, I'm very interested in kind of your background, your kind of your design process, and many of your games are quite minimal and require just a few dice and standard playing cards. Many are also solo games. So, what prompted you to start designing games in general, and then especially these minimalist type games?
My background is kind of I played a little bit of D&D in like sixth grade, and then didn't for a while, and then did again in college, and then was like having a weird time with it, and then I found a really good actual play podcast, Friends of the Table, and listening to like them play PBTA games and like make games of their own, and that kind of got me inspired to write my own games, like little games. Conches and Cameras was the first one that I wrote, and that's drawn pretty directly from improv, especially like long form improv and like dramatic improv more than comedic improv. I took it in high school and then was in an improv group, kind of doing a drop in thing after in college, and a lot of the like exercises and short games and things that you do in improv, especially for dramatic stuff, really stuck with me. And I am someone who struggles a lot with like role playing in character, actually. And those improv games gave me things to work with that made it easier to play a character like on the spot, right?
Right.
And I wanted to write games that kind of gave players those kinds of tools to let them role play easier, to come up with stories easier. And I mean, improv games are really simple a lot of the time, and I like to stick with that, like something you can keep in your head, something that's easy to understand, and jump like right into it.
Right. Kind of bringing those barriers down. That makes sense. So, Stewpot is your game about running a tavern as retired adventurers, and the fantasy tavern, as much as we all love it, it's common and almost overdone, but it's persistent. So, what for you as a designer makes a game in this type of setting worthwhile?
Um, for me, it is I love like slice of life stories, and I feel like tavern stories in general. I mean, I do think they have value in all sorts of different forms, right? Like there's so many different angles to go at it from. And for me, the one I'm interested in is slice of life, which I feel like is not done as well too often. Like there isn't a huge focus on the people working there, and it's
Right.
always on the like, oh, there's an adventuring party here. Oh, there's a bar fight. There's like a showdown down here. There's someone spying on you. Whatever. And combined with my interest in like what how do we reinterpret adventuring, when so much of it is about like power fantasy and kind
Right.
of like a weird colonialist kind of hero narrative, and thinking about it as a job that is really taxing on you, and then you have to retire from it, and like what do you do then, like what, like thinking of it in the way that someone might think of like a star athlete, who
Mm-hmm.
might be able to keep playing into their early 30s if that, but then like has to do something else.
Right.
um and like a lot of those athletes will end up being like coaches or trainers or something, right? um and kind of being a place where adventurers come to, and you're running that, and you know what those adventurers need. You know what their needs are, like physically and mentally and all of that, and kind of having this logical progression in a tavern was really interesting to me, and something I didn't think was really done in a lot of other things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like some of your other games, Stewpot isn't particularly crunchy or rules heavy. It's more about telling stories together. Um, you talked a little bit about your background with improv. So was this your initial design goal with Stewpot? How did the design maybe change over time after its initial conception, if it did at all?
Yeah, I started writing it actually for a game jam that was inspired by the show. I had gotten into this actual play, Friends of the Table, and I had, I think, been reading a little bit of Dungeon Meshi, and I also been like listening to the show. And their first season is like a very standard kind of fantasy adventures going on a quest, but like has some really cool twists and different takes on the genre that I really liked. And um, thinking about that group
Mm.
and thinking about their campaign and like what would come after, um, they had a second season where they finished the season with a big finale that was in Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands by um, Vincent and Miguel Baker. Um, and I had initially like thought of it as like just a very, very short, like one page game, honestly. But listening to them play Firebrands as a finale was like, oh, this could be, I could make a game that is like this that could be used for like fantasy games. Um, and it kind of got bigger and bigger after that, where I got really interested in writing these mini games, um, and like fleshing them out a little more as like a bunch of separate games really that stood together on their own but also could be combined to make this whole tavern experience. Um, and that's kind of where the minimal crunch and stuff comes in too, right? Because it's like, I want these to be storytelling games. I want you to just be able to read them and be like, oh, this makes sense. Let's tell a story with these parts. Um, and be able to jump into each one, and have it be self-contained and not have to like rely on other rules in a different part of the book. Like just be able to use the rules for this game on this page for the most part. Um, and yeah, that was really important to me because in the beginning I was kind of designing each minigame separately, like not thinking of them as connected as much. Um, and yeah, that's kind of what led it to take the shape it's in today.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I like how it's all the different mini games kind of put together. I'm definitely not I'm not as on point as I should be with other games that are out there in the indie world, but I had not seen that before, so I really enjoyed the kind of mini game format.
Hmm.
Um, let's kind of pivot and talk a little bit more about the slice of life games en masse. You talked a little bit about how there's space there to explore some ideas, getting away from the typical kind of power fantasy of your average RPG. So talk a little bit more about that. Do you think, do you imagine more that the kind of subgenre of slice of life games having something to say in the tabletop world?
Yeah, I feel like I've been seeing more and more games in this kind of subgenre after like the indie boom on itch. And what's some stuff I really like. um there is this game that is a hack of Thousand-Year-Old Vampire called Magical Year of a Teenage Witch, which is, not entirely slice of life, but because there's a lot of like magic stuff involved, and about like learning as a witch, but it is heavily that. There's like stuff like Cozy Town by Jamie, who is a really great designer and has a lot of other stuff out. Um, there is Sam, who's working on this game Capitalites, which is kind of about like young, reckless, like 20 somethings kind of slice of life drama, like kind of reality TV show kind of drama, which is really cool. And I think, I mean, games like this have been around. There was a game I really was inspired by early on called Clicks and Hums and Sirens and the Sun, which is about a party and about a relationship and how that relationship like changes and how these people interact over the course of a party. Um, but I don't know if it's been as like common or as like front and center as it is maybe today with games like Wander Home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which was like a huge hit on Kickstarter. Um, J Dragon's other games also, like Sleepaway is a horror game, but it's also, you know, about a summer camp. Um, and I'm really excited to see like what kinds of like combinations of slice of life and other genres
Hmm.
there are to explore, like slice of life and horror and like slice of life and fantasy and like urban fantasy.
Right.
And those are the things that are really interesting to me, where it's like taking a genre like sci-fi or fantasy or whatever, and you know, adding another subgenre onto it, exploring like a very small corner of it, or like a very small window, and focus in. I really like to get very specific with games. um, and I'm really excited to see that happen. And I think that there are a lot of people who are interested in those kinds of games that maybe haven't had as many options before.
Yeah, I think so too. And we had Robert Denton on who did Tiny Taverns, and he
Hmm.
talked about stakes, and he said, you know, don't instead of thinking of slice of life games as low stakes, we can think of them as different stakes. I wonder if when that idea catches on, people will be more keen to explore those kind of smaller, you know, those different spaces instead of worrying about saving the world every single day in their
Yeah.
games.
Yeah. It's for me, a lot of the stakes are like emotions
Mm-hmm.
and character development and internal like character stuff that I feel like can have a little more of a focus. And like there's a lot more room for nuance and a lot more room for like interactions between characters and relationships between characters, and getting to explore that more. Like you can do that in like a regular fantasy campaign, but I feel like a lot of those mechanics that you see, like bonds and things and beliefs about other characters, can be kind of clunky, and it's hard to work with them, and they don't always get a huge focus. um yeah, I really, there's different things that are really cool about slice of life games with um and getting to experience like emotional turmoil like every session, or just like kind of a lot of it for me is like melancholy actually. Well, can't talk.
That's all right.
um where kind of the stuff that I've been working on with Urban Pastel, where it's kind of a sort of fantastic, sort of like magical realism kind of fabulism, and those kinds of genres, inspired by those kinds of genres, where you are, you know, playing characters in a city where things are happening that are maybe a little strange. You know, there's urban legends, there's stuff that like could be magic. You hear that maybe one of these people that lives by you is like a witch maybe. And those kinds of settings where there's a lot of influence from um what we're living through right now with like
Mm-hmm.
capitalism, and like being a young person in like a city or something, and working nonstop and struggling, and at the same time like making friends, and experiencing new things like every day, and kind of pulled between the sense of wonder and experiencing really wonderful things and fantastic things, and also like being crushed by capitalism at the same time and trying not to be. um, and that kind of thing is so much more impactful to me as like a
Mm-hmm.
slice of life game.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this subgenre will develop. So I'm glad we have curious designers like you taking on the charge, because that puts me a little bit out of my depth. But one last question before I let you go:
Mhm.
if you could, what fantasy tavern? You know, you mentioned the different genres. We can be in space, we can be in an urban setting, wherever you like. What kind of what fantasy tavern maybe would you like to visit, given the opportunity?
Oh my god. There there was a game that I played actually of Stewpot, where we created a tavern on the back of a giant turtle with a captain's hat, the captain. And I I really love boats. I really love being on the water or by the water, and I love giant giant creatures and people living on the backs of creatures, and like
Yeah.
that's my ideal tavern. I would like to go and be on the giant turtle tavern
Was that the
swimming
name,
down
the
the
Giant
river.
Turtle Tavern?
I don't remember the name. It's been so long that I've forgotten, but a friend of mine, Karo, who's also an incredible game designer, um, was playing with me and drew this really great picture of this turtle with the tavern on its back and the captain's hat and I think maybe a pipe. I don't remember exactly.
Oh
And
man,
it's that image has just been burned in my brain forever.
is that online somewhere?
Um, I I don't know. It might be. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay,
I
we'll
can
let the
send you a
hunt begin.
message, but yeah.
That's great. So, to learn more about their projects, follow Takuma Okada on Twitter, Itch, and SoundCloud, all of which are linked in the notes below. Takuma, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks again so much for having me. I had a blast talking about all this.